spot on his arm and he sewed up his arm with his own, needle and thread. And I remember like thinking, wow, how strong must he be? Taking hold of the whole army, they're all coming for him. But he's shooting all of them, 2 guns in both hands, shooting all over the place. You get all these films that come out that talk about how great the American army are. Look what they do. Look how they take on this army. Look how 2 people take on, this whole platoon of soldiers. And we get all this information that comes out on things like YouTube and the internet. Look at the Israeli army. Look at the weapons they have. Look at the sophisticated guns they have. And my message here and the lesson here is to learn from the whispers of the shaitan. These are whispers of the shaitan. That the shaitan puts out there for the Muslims to read and to become afraid upon. Yeah? So there's a really nice example when the Americans, they developed one of the bombers. Supposedly this bomber was developed so that it will be invisible. It will be invisible from the radar. That it would fly so high that no radar could ever spot that plane coming. And that it was designed in such a way that when the radar bounces upon it, it will bounce, it will reflect straight back off. And they brought out all these news and all these media facts, and they pushed out all this propaganda in the media talking about this really sophisticated bomber that was able to fly, hundreds of thousands of miles in the sky to bomb people. One thing they didn't realize is that when this plane was in the sky and it started to rain, it wasn't so invisible. In fact, it was easily identifiable on radar when it was wet. But again, this is propaganda you don't hear coming out from the Americans. So again, the lesson here about the waswas, the whispers of the shaitan, is don't believe the media hype that's been produced today about Israeli army, about how great they are, how many numbers. Only look back a few months ago how a whole army couldn't defeat people in Gaza. Look at the losses they suffered when they took on the army in Gaza, when they took on the people of Gaza. Look at the armies today of America and Britain and Allied forces, stuck. Years later after they entered Afghanistan, stuck. The British, facing so many casualties, they're trying to pull their troops out. And they're trying to not make it look like as if they're trying to kind of like remove their troops from battle. They're trying to say, we've done our bit, it's all safe, it's all secured. In fact, what they're doing, they're actually trying to run away from the fight. So the lesson here again from the Battle of Badr is learning about not believing the whispers of the shaitan. When the whispers of shaitan come out and tell us about how great America is, how great the Israeli army is to actually look at the facts and to remember about the propaganda. The third example I want to touch upon here is how the Prophet ﷺ and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he urged the believers to go out and fight. And again, coming back to the point I made earlier on, even though that the believers were promised the victory, they were still commanded and they were still obliged to go out and to engage in this fighting. So again, in Surah Al-Anfal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, in the translation of the meaning, O Prophet, urge the believers to fight. If there are 20 steadfast persons amongst you, they will overcome 200. And if there be 100 steadfast persons amongst you, they will overcome 1,000 of those who believe, because they are disbelievers and people who do not understand. So again, if you remember from Imdad's talk, when we looked at numbers, you had 300 or thereabouts of Muslims on one side, and you had over 1,000 of disbelievers of the Quraysh on the other side. Anyone who had looked at this situation would have thought, man, this is impossible. This is impossible. How would 300 people, less equipped, only one horse and a few camels, how would they take on an army that's 3 times bigger than them, with more weaponry, more arms, more horses, more swords, more archers? People would have immediately wrote them off, isn't it? It's almost like these football matches you get in the FA Cup third round sometimes. You've got the giant killers, Cardiff City versus Arsenal. No one ever thought that this small little town, the painters and decorators, part-time footballers, don't have a proper football strip. They play in their underwear and their t-shirts that they all have to pay for themselves. Part-time footballers take on, the mighty Premiership team, and then what happens? We see it year after year in the FA Cup, isn't it? You find these small little teams defeating the bigger army. And here in the same example is a lesson for us. That victory doesn't come because of numbers. Because if you remember in the battle that came after this, the Battle of Uhud, what happened? The Muslims were far superior in number than the Quraysh. But who lost? So the victory is not about numbers. And like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, is that if there's 200 of you, they will overcome 1,000 of those who disbelieve. So if you remember back to a film, you know who's seen the film 300? You know the 300 Spartans taking on the Romans and the Persians and the rest of them. Yeah, in the same sense. We may be small in number. Like the small in number, the people in Gaza that defended Gaza from the Israelis' onslaught. Or maybe small in number in Afghanistan, or in Iraq, or in Kashmir. But just because we are smaller in number, doesn't necessarily mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He won't grant you the victory if you believe and you fight fi sabilillah. And you're finding today the American troops and the British troops, even though they've got far more superior numbers in our lands, you're finding more and more body bags being sent back to Britain and America every day, even though they've got far more superior troops. So that's the other thing to remember, is about numbers. It's not a numbers game. You can have more numbers, doesn't necessarily mean that you will become victorious. The victory will only come if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you that victory. So you may be many a number, but if Allah is not with you and Allah does not help you, then there's no chance of you gaining victory. Got 5 minutes left, so a couple of more things I want to touch upon. The dua that the Prophet ﷺ he makes is a very beautiful dua as the battle begins. The Prophet ﷺ he makes a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's narrated here in this book. The Prophet ﷺ he says, "O Allah, carry out for me that which you have promised to me. O Allah, bring forward that which you have promised to me. O Allah, if you destroy this group of people of Islam, you will not be worshipped upon this earth." So here Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he makes a dua and he says, "Ya Allah, grant me this victory you have promised for me. Oh Allah, protect these people today, because if these people are destroyed today, your deen will be finished. Islam will be removed from this earth." And again here, going back to the point I made earlier on, the Prophet ﷺ was already promised victory. Why would he make a dua to Allah, imploring Allah to send him the victory and to grant him the victory, imploring Allah to protect these small believers, these small party of believers, against being destroyed? Why would he make this dua? And it's from the sunnah again we realize that not only does the victory being promised from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the actions and the dua need to also be there as well. That the victory may be promised from us. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, in the translation of the meaning, Allah has promised those who believe, that people who believe and do deeds of righteousness, that He'll grant them victory upon the earth, like He granted people before them, and that He will change the state of fear into a state of peace and security. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He promises us in Surah An-Nur that He will grant us victory. And He will grant victory to those who believe and do good actions. And that He will change the situation from one of fear into one of peace and security. So why is it that we take this promise now and we sit back and we think, well, Allah has promised us the Khilafah, Allah has promised that He will change our situation, why do we need to do anything? Let's just sit back, chill out, enjoy the last week of the summer, Ramadan coming up next week, let's just relax and chill out. And again here, from this very small example of the Battle of Badr, we realize what? That even though the Muslims were promised victory, it wasn't enough just for them to prepare themselves in rows, to practice the archery and to practice riding the horses. They spent the night in prayer, praying towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking for the victory. Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify their hearts and to purify their minds. Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen them and to help them disbelieve and to vanquish the disbelievers. That the victory alone is not enough. The actions on the battlefield alone are not enough. What's also required are actions and belief. That is not enough for us just to put faith in Allah and to say Allah's going to grant us the victory. Let's just sit here and let's just relax.